What's up, everybody? My name's Big Kim and welcome back to another Comically Boston Breakdown episode. And today we are talking about the final batch of 3 episodes, the 4th batch of 3 in this 12 episode season of Andor Season 2. And today's episodes are Episode 10, Make It Stop, Episode 11, Who Else Knows, and Episode 12, Jedha, Kyber, Erso, leading us directly into Rogue One, which is honestly gonna sit with people a whole lot differently now that we know what happens before Rogue One and how Andor becomes who he becomes. Because I remember seeing Andor originally in that movie and just being like, damn, this guy's a cold killer. Like, he kills his contact? Like, damn, what the hell? Now you understand why and where he's been and how many people he's had to lose to get there. And like, oh, like, yeah, he is a murderer and he is a cold-blooded killer, but he's a killer for the rebels, you know, like, which is different when most of the people we've seen killing have been on the dark side, no? But coming off of the last week's episodes and last week's bundle of episodes, we had Cyril die with Cassian, and Cyril was like holding his gun and he almost had Cassian in his sights, and Cyril dies looking at Cassian, and Cassian's like, who are you? And he's like, bruh, you don't even know who I am? And then he dies and Cassian doesn't even get to know who his hunter was. And then we also know that Bigg left Cassian last episode and chose the rebellion for him. And so now Cassian has no choice but to be with the rebellion, and the rebellion needs him. So, you know, he's playing his role. And we also know that Cassian saved Mon Mothma in the last episodes and brought her to the rebellion to give her big speech. But we also know that Cassian gets a new best friend with K2SO at the end of the last episode. But we are time jumping from 2 BBY over to 1 BBY. And we lost Brasso in 4 BBY, Cinta in 3 BBY, lots of Gormans and Cyril in 2 BBY. So who will Cassian lose now that it's 1 BBY? We open on 1 BBY and Clea's waking up in the middle of the night to an emergency signal beeping, and we see a quick shot of Lonnie walking away all suspicious and trying to get away from the Empire type of thing. So we figure the message is probably from him, but Luthen then goes and talks to Clea, and she tells him about the emergency message and says, look, if it doesn't look perfect, don't engage. And Luthen says to Clea, I think we used up all the perfect. And I was like, oh, what a line. But also the look on Stellan Skarsgård's face, on Luthen's face, like, is maybe Luthen ready for his end? And maybe it comes sooner than we think. But Luthen then goes and meets Lonnie, and Lonnie has rung the big bell, and he thinks Dedra is putting a team together to come to Coruscant to come after Luthen. And Luthen asks, what are we really up against? And Lonnie says that the Emperor's energy program is all a lie and they are looking for Kyber crystal to power a weapon. And he says, tell me about this weapon. And we all know that he's talking about the Death Star, but we don't hear what Lonnie tells him about this weapon. But the look on Lonnie's face is pure fear, right? Like, he just is so scared of what he's found out about what the Empire is doing and what they can do with this Death Star. And whatever he had told Luthen, we don't see it, and we just cut back to see that whatever he did tell Luthen, Luthen left him dead on that park bench that they were talking about, and Luthen killed him to cover his own ass, even though Lonnie has been his mole, you know, this whole time. And, you know, he's just really like, you know, a witness and evidence against him, so he's got to cover his own path and cover up the rebellion's path, you know what I mean? So that the Empire doesn't know what they're up to, you know what I mean? But poor Lonnie had a wife and kid that will never know that their father was a rebel spy, and now he's dead, you know, like, and they just leave him sitting there on the bench. I was like, that's so crazy. But Luthen then quickly goes back to his shop and starts destroying evidence and all the, you know, files and records of what he's been doing here, when the doorbell rings and he's like, who the fuck is here? And who's there? But Dedra. Dedra is there to get him, and she comes in and acts all cordial at the beginning, and she starts to open up a case, and she pulls out a Star Path unit that I believe is the exact same one that Luthen sourced for Cassian way back in like the first or second episode of season 1, and she's been tracking Axis ever since, you know, so this big through line all the way to the season finale of season 2, you know what I mean? Like, wow, like, it's such tremendous writing that this comes all the way back to this moment, and she thinks that like she's got him and she's beat him, and the conversation quickly turns from like cordial to enemy versus enemy, and she thinks she's just like going to bring Luthen in, and she's like, you're disgusting, and you've just been hiding here right underneath the Empire's nose the whole time in Coruscant. And he's like, do you even know why? Like, and he's like, God, you are so fucking stupid. Like, and he really just tells it to her, and like the little quips back and forth are so intellectual and like, oh, so good, such good writing. But as she thinks she's bested Luthen, she turns around to see the smoking computer, and she's like, what the fuck have you done? And then she turns around to Luthen, and I thought he was going to turn around with a pistol and kind of like old Western style, whoever shot first shoots fastest type of thing, and I thought he was going to kill Dedra. But no, he grabbed a knife as one of the artifacts in his collection. He stabbed himself in the gut with the knife from the collection. I was like, oh no, Luthen is really that guy, right? Like, sure, he killed Lonnie to cover up his own ass, but really he's covering up the rebellion's ass, and his life is not important. He kills himself to cover up the rebellion so that the Empire will not get to make him talk, you know what I mean? Like, that's insanity. But he stabbed himself in the gut. I mean, he should have gone for the neck, because medical units rush in and Dedra's like, keep him alive, I need him alive. So they got like a medical thing on his stomach keeping him alive, but like, if you went for the neck, you know, you should have gone for the Thanos, should have gone for the neck, you know what I mean? But as Luthen gets carted away in a medical evac, Clea sees the whole thing happen, and the Empire starts to seize all of Luthen's belongings in the store, and they're searching all of his stuff and his ship, and now poor Clea is in that same safe house that Cassian and Bix were in a few years back, and they were, you know, hiding out there for a while, and it's even more gutted or even more gross of a place looking now than when they were living there. And she just looks so pissed, but also sad that like her father figure is dead. Oof, but also not dead, right? Like, he's with them, not fully dead yet, like, but dying, rough shape. We then cut from Clea, you know, angry face, thinking about a flashback of her underneath a bench of like she's like behind this grate, and she's like peeking, spying on Luthen, and we see a young Luthen is hiding out in this ship, and he's not fully young, but a younger man, and he's drinking out of a flask, and he's hiding in this ship, and it sounds like there's people that he's with that are killing everyone on this planet, and he's saying, make it stop, make it stop. And that's the title of this episode. So Luthen is in some star war going on, and he doesn't want to be there killing these people. And we hear that his name, like one of the other cadets comes up to him and says, Sergeant Lear. And so I was like, Lear? That's not his name, but Luthen Real, Luthen Real, Lear backwards is real, Luthen Real. That's how he came up with his fake last name, I guess. It's just a flip of his old last name. But we don't ever hear his old first name. So I'm like, I wonder what his Luthen first name was. Was it Nithan? Nuffle? Nuffle Lear? And he changed it to Luthen Rael? But we then see that Luthen finds young Clea on the ship, and, you know, he like opens up the grate and sees that it's just a dirty kid that is clearly like just hiding from this war that's going on this planet, and he just tells her shh, and he like, you know, covers for her and protects her and like keeps her hiding there for a second. And then, you know, the guys come back, and then he sends them away, and then he kind of, you know, opens the grate back up to her, offers her a hand, and, you know, has kind of been her father figure ever since. And we see this is how like Clea and Luthen met, and it's so sad that this is like her origin story with him, you know what I mean? Like, I was devastated. I saw that little hand touching that old man's hand. I was like, oh no. But now Clea is Axis, and she's like acting like Luthen, and she's now, you know, like Cassian, and now the spy for the rebels type of thing, and she's got a mission. So Luthen is in a med bay, and the doctor says that the room is the only thing keeping him alive. So Clea's mission is to go and finish off Luthen so that the Empire can't get that information from him. And she's doing this, I think, because she knows that's what Luthen would want, no? So she sneaks in, she wraps her hand up with bloody bandages. I thought she hurt herself to get in, but no, she just fakes it, bloody bandages, unwraps it, and then steals a nursing outfit. So she's now walking around in this hospital with a bunch of, troops everywhere scattered, and she's just like sneaking her way through. When we then cut over to Jedha getting arrested by the other Imperial officers because this whole arrest that went terribly wrong of Luthen, she did not with direct orders from above type of thing. She's acting on her own, will, and that's a big no-no for the Empire. You gotta ask permission before you do fucked up shit. But Jedra's like, this is ridiculous. Let's go get this sorted. So Jedha leaves her man, not knowing that Clea's sneaking into the building. But there is also guys everywhere, so theoretically he should be protected. We see Clea steals an alien patient to get closer to Luthen, but it only gets her so close. They get stopped like 2 floors short, and she's like, oh, it's okay. And the poor alien creature's like, what the fuck are you? Who are you? Where are you taking me? We then see more flashback of young Clea and Luthen, and Luthen's pawning some artifact, and we see that he's been teaching her negotiating skills from a young age, and calls her his daughter, and Clea looks up at him like, oh, I guess we are father and daughter now, but at least acting as it, and we see that her negotiation skills have been good since she was a young girl, because she gets the lady from Luthen's 20 initial offer to her 7, and then talks her all the way up to 18. And I was like, damn, so only $2 off of the original asking price of Luthen's price? This girl's a great negotiator from a young age, but Luthen and Clea are their fake names, and they're like nomads, traveling around, deserted, in, whatever war they're running from. They just keep running and keep going and keep selling artifacts to live off of and make money. So it's interesting how they made their way from like these scavengers running away from war all the way to Coruscant, which is like the biggest city, right? You know what I mean? But so they make their sale to the lady, they get their money, and then they're about to leave when young Clea sees a bunch of people getting walked into like the town square by the Empire, and there's a bunch of people that are about to get executed, and Luthen's like, let's go, and she's like, no, I'm gonna stay. And Luthen goes, you're on your own. And he leaves. And she stays and watches this execution as a young girl. Just like, already knowing what kind of monsters the Empire are. But she had to see it with her own eyes. Them just wiping out kids and, innocent people. Or, they might have done something wrong. But did they deserve to be executed in public? I don't think so. That's, barbaric. But she then runs and catches up to Luthen as he's walking away, and she says, when will we fight back? And he says, we will lose and lose and lose over and over again until we are ready to strike, and tells her, when I say move, you move. And then she stays still as he keeps walking, and you just hear like a late move, and she starts moving, and he's like, oh god, I didn't mean literally, you gotta listen to every single goddamn, right? Like, she's that kind of kid. She's like, what, you didn't say move, so I didn't move. Like, and he said earlier in this episode to her, before this flashback, he said move. So like, looking back on that moment, you're like, oh god, she's been listening to him ever since, you know what I mean? Like, he's always looked out for her, she's always looked out for him, and they've been together. And oh god, what a sad, sad story for Clea. We then cut back to present day Clea trying to sneak her way closer to Luthen, and she shoots a guard to get closer, but then realizes there's way too many guards on this, floor. And then she pulls out this little device, and we're like, oh boy, what's this? When we cut to a flashback on Naboo, it looks like. And Luthen says to her, you need to pay attention. Life shows us what we can't stand to lose. And says, you can choose to do something else. He's afraid of what he's doing to her and what life he's pulling her into. And he pulls out a button and puts it in the middle of the table and says, do it. Do it. Kind of like Palpatine. And I was geeking out. I was like, do it. Like, why is he telling her, the little girl, to do it? And she says, I know what I want. And she goes to push the button as a young girl. And I was like, oh my god. He kind of grabs the button. And he says, no, don't. And he pushes the button. He goes to push it. And she like goes to look at and watch the explosion happen. And he goes, no, we can't watch. Then people will know what we're involved. You have to look at me and then blow it up, and then we both look surprised, you know, like even though they act very poorly, but everyone else is freaking out, so they kind of just are able to walk up out of there afterwards. But, you know, he pulls out the button and blows up these Imperial troops that are out on this, like, bridge, and it looks like this is Naboo. I would have loved to see more of this flashback, you know, more of this story, but it's interesting that they gave us this whole episode of, like, Clea and Luthen love, you know what I mean? But we cut back to present day, and this was like a nice little flashback because it shows like, oh, where did she learn how to rig explosives and as a distraction? Luthen, from this young age in Naboo. So Clea blows up these Imperial transports to distract most of the guys, but there's still like 2 remaining. So she shoots the 2 guys with her blaster, and I kind of like the blaster she has. It almost looks like a real-life snub-nosed revolver, but then it just makes the noise of like, pew, you know what I mean, like the blaster noise. But I was like, oh man, she's kind of badass. I wish we got to see more of her as like the spy version of her rather than just the store clerk assistant the whole time, you know what I mean? Like, Clea had this in her. Or maybe she just needed the little push of Luthen like dying to really solidify that she's this badass. But she makes it into Luthen and she unplugs him from the machine and sees his final little breaths. And I thought we were going to get like one little final word with her, but no, she just witnesses his final breath and knows that he has now passed on. And she sheds tears and kisses him on his head and then leaves in the nick of time just as guards are running in and come back. And Luthen dies in the end, in episode 1 of this final batch of 1 BBY. And I'm sure there will be more deaths in these final 2 episodes, but we close on just the longest shot of Luthen's dead body on the table as it just cuts to black and it's kind of silence, like a moment of silence for Luthen. And I was like, oh no, Luthen was one of my favorite characters, I gotta kill him. But there's only 2 episodes remaining, so at least they didn't kill him too early. But wow, what a way to start this finale. Now, episode 11 and 12 kind of directly tie to each other, so if you were doing like week-by-week watches, I would recommend all of them can pretty much watched week to week and they don't need the 3-episode bundle, but I would say 11 and 12 need to be watched together because 11 has such a big cliffhanger that you need to watch 12, you know what I mean? Like, you need to finish it. But so episode 11 titled Who Else Knows, and we coming off Dedra getting to access finally after 2 seasons, but Luthen is dead and he fought for a sunrise he will never see. In the recap of that episode reminds me that Cassian Andor was not in episode 10 of Andor at all, right? So his show, he doesn't even appear at all in episode 10, which is just solid writing and just solid show writing that like that episode was as good as it is and he wasn't even in it. Didn't need him. Clea and Luthen had it covered. Amazing episode. But on to episode 11, we open on one of the stormtroopers that Clea killed. Dead bodies just on the ground, and they are all clueless. They think it was a team of at least 3 instead of just one badass girl. And the owner of the hospital comes and talks to this guy here who is taking over for Dedra Meero, and he's like, this is ridiculous, this is my hospital, these are my patients. And the guy's like, you will be arrested if you're gonna talk to me like that. This is an Imperial investigation. If you're fucking interrupting me, you're an accomplice. And the guy's like, your point has been clear. So the guy asks him for his help and to get them the security tapes, and now they have control of this hospital because they threatened this guy pretty much. But Krennic goes in to question Dedra, kind of pokes her on the top of her head and says, who else knows? Which is the title of the episode. And she's clueless, and she's like, Lonnie was killed this morning, I don't know why I'm here. And she's not so clueless because he says, what possible reason would I be down here? And she's like, the Death Star? And he's like, yes, my Death Star. You know, the stupid thing he's been building in secret, but heading towards Rogue One and A New Hope, that Death Star is going to become real important in the Star Wars world, is it not? And but we find out that they have Dedra arrested right now because she's the leak, and all of the information had come from Dedra's like code that she didn't even realize Lonnie had stolen. But Krennic calls her a scavenger, and she had all this information laying around. He's like, no wonder why this guy was able to get to all your files. You had so much shit laying around that you didn't even fucking know. And she tries to say, like, I had to scavenge for information because nobody would give me any information to act on. And he's like, listen, you're a scavenger, you're a little rat. And he's asks her, why would you confront Luth and Rael on your own? And he says, if you're not a rebel spy, you missed your calling. And says, we will do our best to carry on without you, leaving Dedra just in this cell just to look at white walls and just be alone and just think about what she did. We then cut to Clea in the safe house, and she's like chiseling out this wall and finding this dusty old communications device in the wall that they had clearly planted there for emergencies. And we then cut back over to the Empire guy, Hirt, that took over for Dedra, and he sees Clea on the security footage and figures out that it was no team, just one woman, and finds that Clea is like the person, and now starts to put out Clea's face everywhere and starts to be like, we need to find this woman. But we then see Clea is sending out a Morse code message, and we then cut over to Wilman fighting with the rebels, living on Yavin, and he has a limp from whatever leg injury he had gotten a few episodes back. And the girl that was there with him from Gorman, that is now like his girlfriend, is still there with him, and says that this message thing was beeping, and she's like, he's like, how long ago? And she's like, 30 minutes. What the hell is that? And he's like, I gotta go tell someone. So he runs over to tell Cassian who, you know, or that this message, emergency message thing was beeping. And we go over to a poker-esque kind of game. I thought it was Sabacc, but it's not. It's kind of more like a poker game between Melshi, Cassian, and K2SO. And we find out that they have played 862 games, and K2 is making them laugh, and they're all drinking, and they're, you know, they're fully rebel soldiers at this point, right? Like that, now that his girl isn't there, he's not a family man anymore. Like Cassian is fully just a grunt, just drinking and ready for his next mission type of thing. And they're all laughing when Wilman comes in and tells him like, hey, this thing has been going off, and Cassian's like, it's probably not important, don't worry about it, it's a fake signal, it happens all the time. And he's like, no, listen, I keep this thing charged, we need to listen to this thing. And they're like waiting to hear the message again because they missed it the first time. So they're like, oh my god, it's got, something's happening here, like we gotta know who's on the other end of this line. But we then cut over to Krennic telling Hirt to find Clea or failure will be death. And they are going to sell that she has some disease that will kill thousands. So now they're on a manhunt for Clea. And Krennic says to Partagaz, I have to go to Scarif, I'm already 2 hours late. And Partagaz has a plague to stop. And Partagaz is like, best of luck to us both. And I believe both of these guys die pretty soon. Krennic, I think, dies by way of like force choke or something, or gets shot by Cassian, one of the two. I gotta rewatch Rogue One. But Partagaz, we'll see maybe what happens to him later this episode or 2 episodes. Oh boy. But then we cut back to Cassian and the guys, and the message starts going off again. And he hears the message, and K2SO is like, this isn't any message I recognize, but by the way you're springing into action, maybe you do. And he goes, Melshi, I'm gonna need some help, you know, like, and Cassian recognizes this signal immediately as it's an emergency signal from Clea, and he thinks it's from Luthen though, because this is Luthen's signal that he used to use. And K2's like, these guys are drunk, you were gonna let them fly a ship? What the hell? Like, and as they're flying out, K2 is like, listen, we are obeying many orders, would you like to know how many? And he goes, no, 17. And then he goes, okay, jump, and he goes, 18. And then they jump off the planet, but Cassian doesn't like being told when and where he can't come and go, you know, so Cassian will do whatever Cassian wants, you know what I mean? But he is there for the rebels, but he's going after one of his friends, and he's answering this emergency signal. When Hirt comes to Dedra Meero in her little jail cell and asks her advice on finding Clea, and she puts him onto the pulse code radios, and maybe they'll be using those for emergency transmissions, but she goes, maybe it's too late, because they already missed the original call that has Cassian on his way. We then see Wilman gets reamed out by the general, I forget his last name, but the rebel general, for Cassian, and he tells him that it was an emergency call, but it was an emergency final call, and stands up to him and says a lot of us wouldn't be here without Luthen, and he gets himself confined to his quarters until further notice. So poor Wilman has to go limp away, and I'm like, ah, man. But at least Wilman stands his ground. You know, Wilman's a badass. But Cassian knows exactly where to go because he's been there before, but he just hopes that they are still there. So Cassian uses the little Morse code thing and messages Clea back. But this time the Empire's listening and they hear it. So now it's a race. Who will get to Clea first, Cassian or the Empire? Oh boy, I have a bad feeling about this. And Cassian lands, but the Empire's also en route. And Cassian does a little comms check, and K2 is like, I don't like it here. and he goes, keep the engines running. Oh god, and the slow tension building as like the music builds, just slowly getting tenser and tenser as the Empire's coming in and blows their comms, and K2 is like, hears it, and he's like, oh no, what's going on? And he sees an Imperial shuttle arrive, and he's like, oh no. And Cassian and Melshi come for Clea and knocks on the door, and Cassian says, Luthen, it's me, Cassian! And Clea opens the door and looks at him and says, it would be you, wouldn't it? After all this, Luthen dragged him into the rebellion, and now, like, if this was Luthen's emergency final call to be brought to the rebellion because his cover's blown type of thing, Cassian would have been the one to come and save him. Oh, the poetry. It looks like it's poetry. It rhymes. Oh, God. Fucking... my heart hurts right now thinking about it. Like, oh... Clea then tells them everything because she knows she doesn't have a whole lot of time, and tells them Luthen's dead, about the Death Star, Galen Erso, and Cassian says we can't stay here and we're not leaving her here. We're not leaving Clea here. But K2 springs into action and comes in, and an Imperial guard goes, did we ask for droid backup? And they're like, no. And he like points at them and goes, hey, are you with us? And K2 just gets close to him and goes, no. And just like backhands him off a bridge. I'm like, dude, K2 is the funniest droid. But also terrifying because these giant K2 droids are so strong and durable. Like, they don't use blasters. They don't use anything but hands and fists and feet, you know, like kicking things, slamming people, throwing people. Like, K2 is a dangerous droid, but so funny. I love that Alan Tudyk voices him. Honestly, it's criminal that we only got K2 for like a brief cameo and then 2 episodes. Like, he should have been a way bigger part of this series because he's just that good. And Clea says to Cassian, you told me you were done once. And Cassian says, and you told me I was wrong. And it says, you need to tell the people of Yavin what she just told him. And Cassian owes Luthen that as Imperial troops are closing in on the room, and they cut to the credits on episode 11. I was like, you bastards! So immediately, the cliffhanger on 11 was so big that you need to get into 12 and know what happens to Clea. Like, what, the tension was so big, I couldn't believe they ended it right there. I thought for sure whatever climax was going to happen at the end of that episode would have been within that room. But no, that had to tie into episode 12 story. So I love that these two are kind of like one big final hour or final movie of the show, you know what I mean? So we go into episode 12, titled Jedha, Kyber, and Erso. So coming off of Luthen dying, and they're looking for Clea, and Cassian comes to save her. But how will they get out alive with troops closing in on them? But they do have K2 backup incoming, so either way, I have a bad feeling about this. But we open on Clea saying, Yavin, after all this? What a bitter ending. Cassian's like, come on, it's not that bad. Come back with us, and you'll get a hero's welcome. And Cassian says, you gotta tell them what you told us. We aren't leaving here without you. But K2 then shorts out the Imperial troopers' comms right back. You know, like, hey, you shorted out our comms, I'll short out yours. And then Hirt and his squad are getting closer and closer to Clea's room, and Cassian shoots the Morse code device, and tension just keeps building and building as they're walking down the hallway. It's like, oh god. And then Melshi goes out to leave and sees a bunch of these guards all point their flashlights on him in the hallway, and then he scurries back to the room and he's like, oh my god, they're out there. And they're like, how many? He goes, I couldn't see, probably because the light was in his eye, so he couldn't make out how many there really were. But Cassian and Melshi and Clea are very much so outnumbered, and then they throw in a stun bomb, and they stun everybody, and they all go falling, and Melshi starts to defend them, killing some of the troopers, but Cassian and Clea took the stun bomb way worse, and Clea's pretty much knocked out from this thing. And K2 comes in as backup. He slams one, kicks one, and then grabs Heert and uses him as a human shield, as like their own guy shoots him, and then he throws another guy into a wall, and you're like, God, K2's such a beast. And then he comes in and goes, Cassian, I've cleared a path. And Cassian's just like, oh, Jesus Christ, okay, K2's the man. Like, and so they get out of there alive, and I was really sweating for a minute, thinking that they were going to all die, but no, they all make it out alive. Clea, Melshi, K2, and Cassian all make it out alive, and K2 looks at Cassian and says, so there's no more doubts on my value, yes? Like, so, and Cassian just kind of doesn't answer him. She goes, come on, track home, back to Yavin. You know, so they go back to Yavin, but we cut over to Mon with her new rebel haircut now that she's not living in luxury on Coruscant. So she's talking to Saw Gerrera, and we see Saw Gerrera looking even more decayed from all that Rhino that he keeps huffing on, and we see that he's clearly paranoid, which I thought this guy was like a general, like big warrior, and like just that badass. This guy's now just a meth addict. Every time I see Saw Gerrera, especially this close to like the Battle of Yavin, I'm like, this guy's a junk box. He's got a metal leg, he's huffing what I thought was oxygen, but no, it's definitely rhydonium that he's just living off of this point in Rogue One. But he's talking to Mon, and Mon's like, you have to be careful on Jedha. There's a whole Star Destroyer over the city. And he's like, how do you know I'm on Jedha? Your spies are wrong. I'm not here. But he is 100% on Jedha. But Saw is all paranoid because he thinks the rebels are also after him and not just the Empire. Which means, you know, when they send that pilot, or whoever that pilot is that gets to Saw Gerrera in Rogue One, that's probably why he's so mistrusting. And he's like, listen, I'm here for Galen Erso. I'm here for Saw Gerrera. I need to get him a message. He finally sees him, and Saw Gerrera's like, nope, you gotta go talk to this squid thing, Borgullet. You know, I gotta make sure you tell him the truth. Like, how much drugs is this guy taking that he's trusting the squid alien thing to tell the truth? You know what I mean? Like, alright, Saw, whatever, bro. But Saw says to Mon, if only you lie as well as you fight. And, or maybe backwards, I might be dyslexic. He might have said, if only you fight as good as you lie. And then it kind of just cuts out, and the conversation ends as he hangs up on her. And then Cassian comes in to land, and they're all like, there's a ship landing, and they're all guns pointed on him, and Cassian lands like, this lady needs medical treatments. And they're like, who else is with you? He goes, just us! And K2's like, hello! So then the rebel general brings Cassian in to talk to the other rebel council with Organa and Mon, and they're like, Jesus Christ, these bastards with these rebel bullshit going on makes the Senate look easy. You know, Cassian leaving without orders, they're like, Jesus Christ. But so then Cassian goes and tells all of them that Luthen is dead, and about them building a weapon in the Kyber crystal, and tied to Goro Massacre, and Kyber, and Jedha, and Galen Erso, which is the title of this episode. And Cassian stands up for Luthen's name, and to the other council members of the rebellion, and I'm like, ooh, this scene was so good. So Cassian's standing up for Luthen. He's like, I can't stand to hear his name run down by people who have given a fraction of his sacrifice for this rebellion. And there's a couple of people on this rebellion council that are like, oh God, this guy, he's just talking out his ass. But he is so absolutely correct that what has Luthen sacrificed? Everything. He sacrificed everything for the rebellion. And then like protected them at all costs, you know, was willing to kill himself than giving information to the Empire, right? Like there couldn't be more of a rebel inside of Luthen. But these council members are like such pussies, and they forbid him from his ship, and he's grounded. And the general tells Cassian that his contact with Saw Gerrera has sent 3 urgent messages in the last 10 hours. And Cassian goes to the infirmary to see Clea, and she's in rough shape, but she will live. And he tells her, this is not exactly the hero's welcome, but it's a lot for them to hear right now. I'm doing what I can, I promise. And we then cut over to Mon having tea and telling Vel that Luthen is dead and Cassian is grounded. And Vel says he should stop saving people. And I was like, yeah, Vel, he should. But Mon asks Vel to spy on Cassian to make her believe what he's saying to them, you know, and to believe about the Death Star, the weapon, everything, and Luthen dying, all of it. We then see with the general again of the rebellion that Cassian's contact is trying again to contact them, but he will only talk to Andor. And so they're like, fuck, we need to send Cassian, even though he's grounded, now we need to send him because he's so valuable to this rebellion, we need to go send him to figure out what this guy's information is on Jedha. But Jedha is also a war zone right now with a Star Destroyer up over their city. So Vel then goes over to Cassian and they toast to Luthen, and Cassian says, we can't toast them all, can we? And Vel tries to toast everyone that they've lost from season 1 on, and she says Gorn, Nemik, Terramin, Cinta, the Gormans, Ferrix, your mother, lastly, Aldani. And, you know, where they've been, and they miss, like, Brasso, and I'm sure there was others too, but they do name most of them. I was like, wow, that is so sad. But these two have known each other since, like, that first heist that they did together back on in season 1 in Nemik. Oh, what a good character. I can't believe he comes back all the way back into the finale, you know what I mean? And Vel asks Cassian straight up, Mon wants to know if your Luthen story is real. And he says, he died for it. Does it matter what he did to us along the way? None of this exists without him. And a lot of us wouldn't even be rebels in the rebellion without Luthen. Like, oh, it's crazy. And Cassian says Clea wouldn't lie about it. And Vel says, tell me what she said to you, you know, exactly. And she hears everything now. And is getting the full story from Cassian, but didn't need to spy on him because they're friends and they go way back. But we see Clea in the infirmary, and she's like pulling off her plugs and leaving. She doesn't want to sit here anymore by herself. But it's raining, so she's just going to walk out into the rain. And we then see Partagaz is listening to Nemik's speech that was on that little recording device that he left for Cassian. And Cassian, we heard listening to it back in the day. But so the Imperials have confiscated or found this device along the way at some point, and Partagaz has taken that speech and is listening to it as kind of like a pep talk type of thing, and listening to just how poetic but how true these statements were of this rebel that has been living and fighting this war. And he says it just keeps spreading, doesn't it? And one of the other guys says it's hard to contain, and they're talking about like the rebellion. And one of the other ISB officers comes in to bring him to talk, and they're like waiting for him. And I think he's kind of getting arrested for being a part of Dedra and everything as well. And he's like, could you give me a moment to collect my thoughts? And as he's sitting there collecting his thoughts, he pulls out a blaster and kills himself. We don't see him kill himself, but the guys are outside the door and they hear it, and the stormtroopers are kind of like, what the hell happened? And the other officer just kind of knows exactly what happened and just kind of at ease, gentlemen, at ease. Ooh. We then see Clea walking out into the rain, and she's just going to walk out into the jungle in Yavin. Is she trying to like kill herself? Go get eaten by those beasts that we saw earlier in the season? When Cassian was stealing that TIE Avenger? Remember, that was on Yavin before the events of the rebels taking Yavin as its home base, you know what I mean? But Vel says to Cassian, and we see Vel leaving their conversation, and she says to him, reconnect with Bigg. And Cassian says, she's safe, isn't she? And she's like, that's what I hear. She wouldn't be safe with me. But tells him to reach out anyways and don't wait too long, because in Rogue One, Cassian might not get another chance to tell her how he feels about her, you know what I mean? And the ending of this episode is heartbreaking. Like, oh god, I thought something bad was gonna happen to Bix. Little did I know they were gonna make me cry with tears of happiness. Happy sad tears, you know what I'm saying? But Vel, as she's leaving Cassian's place, finds Clea in the rain and puts a jacket over her and takes her back to her place. And Clea says it had to be done, you know, talking about what had to be done with Luthen. And she's like, that must have been hard. And she says it had to be done. And Vel says, it gets tiring saying that, doesn't it? And Clea says, he always used to say, know your way out before you go in. I don't even really know where I am. And I think this means more than just, I don't even know what planet I'm on. Because she knows she's on Yavin, but she doesn't know where she is as a human without Luthen. She's like, God, my whole life he's been there guiding me and mentoring me and showing me how to be a better rebel and, you know, think and be really, you know, ahead of the game. And oh, it's so heartbreaking. And she's like, I don't even know where I am. And Vel says, I have friends everywhere, which was like their code. And she says, you're here with friends. And she tells her to sleep, and that Vel has to go talk to Mon and tell her that all this is legit. And K2 got Melshi and him released because they didn't want to hear him talk anymore and listen to him. And the general comes to tell Cassian that he has to go to Jedha to talk to his contact with Saw's crew. And I believe that's the same guy that we see at the very beginning of Rogue One, who Cassian ends up killing because I have a bad leg, I'm never going to be able to climb out. And he goes, it will all be okay, and shoots him in the back. And like, this is like the first thing we see of Cassian in Rogue One. Honestly, insanity. It's crazy. But Cassian's sleeping, and K2 wakes up Cassian and says, the man you don't like is here. And we see that Bail Organa is there, still played by Benjamin Bratt. And Organa comes and tells him that if he dies fighting the Empire, I want to go down swinging. And Cassian chuckles, and he says, is that amusing to you? And he goes, no, it's just you and Luthen would have gotten along a lot better than you realize. Which is very true, you know, like Luthen and Bail could have been teammates in this whole thing, you know, but instead they kind of didn't even know about each other type of thing. But Melshi is leading a rebel group on a run, so we still see that he's around. And if you guys don't remember who Melshi was, he was one of the prisoners that broke out of that prison with Cassian. And, you know, Cassian, I think, gave him a gun or something, and then that gun came back a couple episodes, and Vel picked up the gun and said, whose gun is this? And then Melshi was like, mine. That's who Melshi is. But Melshi's leading a rebel group, and he's like on a run, so maybe he got a promotion as well. And we see Wilman's having dinner with his girl, you know, a part of the rebellion as well. And Cassian is getting ready to leave, and he's walking through the camp. And the shots of him, like in the last like shots of him with like his full Rogue One look and the leather jacket and the blaster as he's heading out for probably the final time, because he will not be coming back to Yavin with the events of Rogue One, I don't think. You know, I really gotta rewatch that movie now, because it means so much more now. You know what I mean? Like, oh, now that you know all this background information on him, it hurts so much more. But as Cassian's walking through the rebel camp, we see Vel and Mon eating, and she's like sitting there next to her with a little bob cut, and she's now kind of embracing her rebel nature in this, you know, island, in this camp of like rebel base, you know. And we then cut to Mon's husband, or ex-husband now, Perrin, and he has this new drunk girl next to him, and he looks all strung out, and his beard's grown longer, his hair's longer, and he's drinking more, like he's a drunk now. So we see not only the people that we liked and where they've gone, but we also see people like Perrin that were just along the way, and what this rebellion has done to them. You know, like he had this loving wife, and he was on Coruscant, he thought, and he had a wife that was in the Senate. Little did he know the rebellion was going to tear apart his family. We then see Kleya is embracing being a rebel now on Yavin, and Dedra is in prison, the same prison jumpsuit that Cassian wore back in season 1 in that episode where it was like climb and, you know, something like that. No, one way out, keep going. We then see Cassian walks by that healer, that force healer that we saw earlier this season. And the healer had said to Bigg that Cassian's path was so clear and that he was a messenger. And she sees him and gives him a nod, and he nods back, and she gives him like a look at the end as if like she can sense that his fate and his path is not going to be much longer. And then Saw we see on Jedha. We then see Krennic in front of a 90% complete Death Star. So Cassian then goes to get on his ship, and K2 says, rumor is we have a flight plan. It's so much easier when I know what we're doing. You know, because he was kind of freaking out earlier in the episode, like, flight plan, where are we going? I need some direction. So K2 and Cassian take off to fight in Rogue One, and we'll pick up with them there. But they take off into the sky, and that's like the last shots we see of them as they're taking off into the blue daytime sky, you know what I mean? When we cut over to B2 with another droid, and I was honestly getting ready to type like, God, they never went back to B2, what dickheads. they fucking knew I was gonna type that, because all of a sudden we see a shot of B2 with the lady that was like with Brasso, that Brasso left B2 with, and B2's with another droid, and they're kind of playing like tag and chasing each other around, so B2's happy. Oh god, this stupid little droid made me cry. I was like, B2, my man, like, we came back for you, don't worry. But we also see that Bix went back to this grain planet where Brasso died, and she now has Cassian's baby, and she's just like looking out into the field knowing that Cassian is where he needs to be, and she's kind of smiling, and like this ending shot of them standing in a field looking off into the distance is like the same shot of Cassian and Jyn Erso looking off into the distance in the last shots of Rogue One. But it hurts so much more now as the credits roll, and you're like, oh no, so Bix has a little Cassian Jr. out there somewhere, and we know that Rogue One happens like next, but it's a whole lot sadder knowing that Vel said reach out to Bix because she knows that he has a son but didn't want to wait so long so that he doesn't know that he's a dad, but he ends up dying not knowing that he's a dad. Like, oh, and he dies, and he is the reason that his son may have a future. Like, what a beautiful ending. It hurt me with happy, sad tears. Like, I was like, you know, wow, what an ending. Just them gonna fly off into happiness? No. They don't just fly off going into Rogue One to have a war. They cut back to show us that not only did Bix not die, they could bring Bix back in the future. She could come back with her son. Just kind of like Hera Syndulla and Kanan Jarrus' son of Jason Syndulla, I think is his name. But what a series, I can't believe season 2 didn't drop week to week. Like, imagine we had 12 weeks to talk about this. It would have been so much fun. But instead, we had about a month to talk about it. Anyone that's joined me in these episodes and wanted to chat about Andor or watch these videos, I really appreciate you guys. I hope you enjoyed Andor as much as I did. I know this series is long, but man, was it good. And that is a wrap on Andor Season 2. And wow, what a cast. Like, there was so many people throughout this show, like minuscule characters that I loved, like Lonnie, like people that didn't even really get a chance to shine, but they just still shined. Like, what a good show. They did such a good job. The writing, Tony Gilroy was amazing. It's now going to enhance Rogue One. And, you know, these episodes of Andor are some of the best rated Star Wars things ever, right? Like, Episode 8, Who Are You, is ranked 9.8. Episode 9, Welcome to the Rebellion, is ranked 9.7. Episode 10, 11, and 12 are all up into the 9s, a 9.5, a 9.4, and a 9.7 for the finale. Like, those are some very, very, very highly rated episodes for Star Wars in general, for any shows in general, but for Star Wars, like, this is a crazy, well-reviewed, critically reviewed show. I'm sure audience people are like, oh, it's long, I don't have patience, losers. But I did also see a fact the other day that something like the Star Wars saga in all of the runtime of the Star Wars saga, and like the Skywalker saga, is like 20 hours and like 15 minutes or something like that. But then I saw some other reports that it was like 22 hours. But either way, you get the point. Like, the runtime of the entire Skywalker saga, of the movies, and I think even if you include like The Mandalorian, Ahsoka, and any of the other shows that tie into the Skywalker of it all, I think it's like up there into the 20 plus hours worth of watch time. But if you tally up just Andor Season 1 and 2 and Rogue One, it's comparable. And it's like 20 hours and 13 minutes or something of watch time. Like, so you pretty much doubled our Star Wars watch time from 20 to 40 hours just by including the Andor saga. You know what I mean? And what happens with Sar and Luthen and all them. And like, I absolutely loved this show. I think it's criminally underrated. But comment below your thoughts on Andor. Were you watching it binge watch? Did you watch it week to week? Have you been watching it since Season 1 came out and you were eagerly waiting Season 2? I would love to hear all of your Andor thoughts, good or bad, down in the comment section below. Or you can message me on my other social medias. Links for those down in the description below. thank you guys so much. The best way to support the channel, if you've made it this far, and please consider doing it, is liking this video, commenting below, subscribing if you haven't already, sharing this video with a friend. It goes a long way to get the video out into the algorithm, and make sure you hit that bell so you don't miss future Star Wars content, because we know that there will be more Star Wars shows coming with Ahsoka Season 2 and more Star Wars movies on the way as well. So stay tuned. Thank you guys so much for coming on by. My name's Big Cam once again, and I will see you beautiful people in the next one. Peace!